So there's a story in 2 Kings, chapter 4. And it's a story about Elisha and the Shunammite woman. I might not be saying that right, but that's how I say it. Shunammite woman. And she was a really godly woman. She had a heart for God. And she said to her husband one day, you know, the prophet comes through our area a fair bit. I'm embellishing the story a little bit, but probably happened that way. And she said, I would really like to have a room for him to stay when he comes through this area, that he could have a room to stay in our house. And he was okay with that, so she put together a room. She put a bed in it, a table, a chair, things for him, so that he could have his own room when he was in that area. And he did come, and he would come whenever he was in the area and stay there. And one time when he was there, he was asking her, what can I do for you? And she said, nothing, everything's fine. And then he said to his servant Gehazi, he said, go get her. He had a word from the Lord for her. She didn't have a son. And in those days, it was really important to have a son. And he said to her, he prophesied over her, he said to her, in a year from now, you'll have a son. And it all came to pass. Several years later, the son went out to the field with his father, and got a bad headache. And they brought him in from the field, and he died. And she put him on the bed. I think it was even the prophet's room. She put him on that bed, and she said, saddle up. I'm not sure if it was a horse or a donkey or what it was, but saddle up the beast. And so a servant did that. She told her husband, I'm going to see the prophet. He's like, why go today? You know, it's not a festival. It's not a special day. And she's like, I'm going. And she did. And the prophet saw her from afar coming. And he sent his servant on ahead to say, you know, is everything okay? Is everything okay with you? Is everything okay with your husband? Is everything okay with your son? She says it's all okay. It's all well. It's good. She wasn't ready to open up about the grief in her life. She wanted to get to that prophet. And when she did, just want to find it here. When she did, she falls at his feet in bitter distress. And this is verse 27. When she reached the man of God, in 2 Kings 4, verse 27, when she reached the man of God at the mountain, she took hold of his feet. Gehazi, the servant, came over to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She is in bitter distress, but the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me why. And then she opens up her mouth and she says, did I ask you for a son, my Lord? She said, didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes? And at that point, Elisha sends the servant on ahead and says, put the staff on the boy. And she said, I'm not going unless you come. I'm not going unless you come. And so they went. Gehazi went and laid the staff on the boy, but nothing happened. And when Elisha got there, it says the boy was lying there dead on his couch. He went in, shut the door, and prayed to the Lord. Then he got up the bed and laid on the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. As he stretched himself out upon him, the boy's body grew warm. Elisha turned and walked back and forth in the room. Have you ever walked back and forth when you're praying, when you're burdened, when you're in intercession? I do a lot of pacing myself. Lost my place now. So much for the asides. Yeah. So he walked back and forth in the room, and then he got on the bed and stretched out upon him once more. The boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. And Elisha summoned Gehazi and said, call the Shunammite. And he did. When she came, he said, take your son. She came, fell at his feet, and bowed to the ground. Then she took her son and went out. Now, I want to just share about this story. This story has hugely impacted me. I was reading it one day, and I was trying to look back in some of my journals to see what I had written down about it, but I couldn't find the right ones. So, we left ministry in 2001. And when I read this verse, and I read her saying, "Did I ask you for a son, my Lord? Didn't I tell you, don't raise my hopes?" All of a sudden, somehow I was in this story, and it wasn't the Shunammite woman anymore, it was me. And it was me saying, "God, did I ask you for ministry? I didn't want this." And, well, I didn't ask for it. He knows what we want. That was the desire of her heart, was a son. God puts desires in us. And the desire was there for that, but it was like this all came about, and it wasn't by my design, it was by your design. And I just remember just weeping and weeping. And somehow through this story I got in touch with this pain, this deep pain. And there was a promise then, through the story, it was like there's a promise of resurrection. And I really feel that we're entering into that season of resurrection. But I want to share this story in terms of there are promises that God's done. There's things that there are places that God has taken you, things that He's done, things that He's raised up in you. And then for whatever reason, they die. They die, and our hope dies with them. And there's a process in that. Like, God does those processes. We see that in Joseph. We see that in David. We see that in, there's a process through the wilderness where He gets you ready. But it doesn't feel real good. It doesn't feel real good. And I just want to say to you, if that's you, there is a resurrection. Allow the Lord to speak to you about that. But what dies? Remember that verse where it talks about unless a seed falls to the ground and dies? You're not going to get the plant that comes up. You're not going to get the harvest that comes up. So there's a death process. And, you die daily. But there's sometimes a big death that He wants to take us through. And then some resurrections. So I just want to share that.